Hi, this is Andy Hoffman of CryptoGoldCentral.com, the sound money blog of the 21st century, in which I write daily of my vision of the future of money, in which Bitcoin is the center of the universe. Try my free 7-day trial membership and contact me at ahoffman@CryptoGoldCentral.com to arrange cryptocurrency or precious metal consultations. I was not planning on doing a one-on-one this week as I focus my efforts on marketing and preparing for tomorrow's epic Denver meetup with myself, Vortex, Thomas Sun, Adam Meister, and Mike Krieger, which I might add will be live streamed over the World Crypto Network at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's tomorrow night, Wednesday, for those that can't make it in person. However, after yesterday's direct message discussion on sound money and cryptocurrencies with JW Weatherman, who had a spectacular one-on-one appearance last month, I thought an impromptu episode on a topic that I, as a longtime sound money advocate, love to discuss would be a great idea. Thus, I'm thrilled to have JW Weatherman back on the show, who in a world of Bitcoin maximalists like myself, stands out as the king Bitcoin maximalist. To that end, welcome, JW, to One-on-One.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yes. So the topic of today's extremely important discussion is threefold. One, does Bitcoin constitute money? Two, are other cryptocurrencies able to make that claim? And three, irrespective, are altcoins competitors to Bitcoin? Which I'll start with a list of the characteristics of money that I, as a well-known sound money champion for 15 years, have discussed countless dozens of times, i.e. durability, portability, divisibility, uniformity, otherwise known as fungibility, scarcity, and acceptability. For years, I mocked fiat currencies' claim to be money, given how few of these traits they possess, in some cases partially and others not at all. However, now that Bitcoin has emerged, the only assets I viewed in the past as money, gold and silver, appear laughable too. As compared to Bitcoin, they fall far short in all categories. So, JW, how do you define money and how do you compare the monetary attributes of fiat currency, Bitcoin, and gold?
That's a good question, man. So the attributes you just listed, I totally agree, are attributes of a good money, but that's not really what money is in my view and in the Austrian view. So money is the item, the asset that's selected among a group of traders that they use as a medium of exchange, as a store of value, basically to make transactions easier. And so all the attributes that you listed would be things that that's people over time have tended to try to select for. Like if you can either use bananas or gold for money, people tend to use gold for all the reasons that you just listed. It just works better. But if they don't have access to gold, they might use bananas, right? If it's prison and they don't have access to gold or bananas, they might use cigarettes, right? So they tend to try to find whatever they can get their hands on that works best as money, and those criteria have historically and logically been used. But something doesn't become money until it's used as money, if that makes sense.
Of course it does. I mean, the whole point with gold is that throughout time, we're talking about 5,000 years, it was the one thing that universally, even though it was not found everywhere, but universally, word got around in slow fashion that it was money, that it was acceptable around the world, and all kinds of things have been used to try to promote trade. And of course, a local environment, you might use bananas or cigarettes, but on a global basis or a regional basis, there needed to be something that people could accept. And gold worked for many centuries, and the same for silver to a lesser extent, and other things. But the fact is, as we moved into the modern world, where modern technologies created fiat currency, people started to realize that precious metals were not particularly useful, as far as they weren't practical, I should say. So while fiat currency is more practical, it has less monetary properties, and that was the problem, because especially as the technologies got more advanced, the ability to manipulate both precious metals and fiat currency has gotten to the point where it's created a world of inflation and debt and market manipulation that has benefited the 1% at the expense of the 99%. And hence, Bitcoin came along. So how would you compare Bitcoin's monetary properties in its early stages of development, as we're not even 10 years old, compared to fiat currency and gold?
Yeah, so I think that fiat currency came into existence because there were limitations and weaknesses with gold. Gold had the biggest problem that I think of when I think of gold is divisibility. It is divisible, right? You can cut it up, but it's really hard to buy a soda with gold because you would have to have a piece of gold that's like nearly microscopic, and that makes it hard to weigh and hard to exchange. And that's why silver was used a lot in conjunction with gold. And that really illustrates sort of, I think, a big problem, right? Like if you have gold and you're using that as your unit of account, you're doing all your bookkeeping, like, you're richer this month than last month because your net assets in terms of gold are more, right? Last month I had 15 ounces of gold net worth. Now I have 15.5 ounces of gold, right? When you introduce something like silver, because of weaknesses with gold, you end up with a weird situation where you have to try to do your accounting in terms of two different assets. And those two different assets, they're free floating, right? They're like anything else in the universe. They don't have a fixed relationship with each other. And so you end up with trying to buy a suit for a certain amount of silver and a certain amount of gold. And that changes over time, even if the shopkeeper doesn't want to change the price of the suit, because the amount of silver on the market in relationship with gold is changing. So because of that weakness, we ended up with banking, and banking was where we could finally get rid of silver and just do gold. And that was great because you could use a $5 note, and that represented $5 worth of gold. And then the gold was just kept in the bank. Unfortunately, that caused another problem, which was centralization and a real big security issue where it was very easy to extort the bank operators. And they got pushed into central banking, where there's really one bank and it's run by the biggest mafia in the area. And that's where we get not only like banknotes, but banknotes that that are no longer backed by gold, right? We just get fraudulent notes floating around. So all of this whole like sort of history of money illustrates different weaknesses in that money. And if you look at Bitcoin, it doesn't have those weaknesses. It is secure. It's hard to steal. It meets all the criteria that we talked about. Plus, it's divisible, so that it doesn't have the problem of gold. And then it has attributes that are just insanely cool. Like you can transfer it instantly, right? The transportability is unbelievable. So it's even better than gold in other ways too. But I think the most important thing is that it's divisible. It also has a fixed supply, which is way better than gold. So there are things that are just kind of incredibly cool about it. But if you just look at the weaknesses in money, you look at a tool and you say, hey, that tool is really, really valuable. Well, it's good to go back and look at, well, what were people using before that? They were using baskets on their head, right? Now you understand the wheelbarrow is really important. So with gold, because it wasn't divisible, and Bitcoin is divisible, you can see how valuable it is. But again, these are attributes of assets that would tend to be selected as money, but money itself is the one thing that people use to facilitate trade amongst themselves. Oh, sorry, man, we lost your audio.
Sorry, no, that was just me on mute. Cool. I muted myself. The key to what you just said there was when you talk about Bitcoin, what did people use before Bitcoin? And that's why it's so amazing, because again, I spent 15 years talking about these very things, durability, portability, et cetera, and saying, look, fiat currency hasn't any of these things, but gold does. But so here, I'm going to take them down now one by one very quickly. Okay, durability. You could say, yes, gold is durable. It lasts forever. But you know what? It's not, because people melt it down. They shape it into whatever they want. If they have coins, they clip them off. Bitcoin, you can't do that with. You can't. It's one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, and you can't change that. Portability, again, a joke. I mean, yes, it was always a problem with gold's portability, but when you look at it in context of Bitcoin, it's almost laughable that people consider it, or did consider it, money. Divisibility, yes, gold is theoretically divisible, but barely so. I love, for years, people would buy 1/10 ounces of gold because they thought that, well, you can barter with exactly 1/10 of an ounce of gold. But the fact is, gold is as undivisible as anything you're going to find. And more importantly, how do you even know it's 1/10 of an ounce of gold? It's not like if you were in trade, like you'd have a scale so you could know. or even trust the scale if there was a scale.
Right. You gotta drill it, and then you gotta take some of the shavings from the drill, and then
Yes.
you have to do a chemical test, and that kind of screws up the durability even more, right?
Yes. Then you have the case of uniformity, otherwise known as fungibility, because of course there are alloys. For instance, a gold eagle is alloyed, whereas a gold maple leaf is not necessarily alloyed. But then again, how would the person who's buying it know if it was alloyed? And then it's the different types of gold coins, for instance, have completely different values. For instance, if you want, and it's particularly, you see this in silver, if you have 1,000-ounce you have 100-ounce silver bar, and they do have 1,000-ounce bars. They are worth so much less than a 1-ounce coin because no one wants them. So is it really fungible? If silver in one form is not worth the same as silver in another form, whereas in Bitcoin, whether you send someone 5,000 Bitcoins or 1 Bitcoin, each Bitcoin is worth the same thing. And what do we have last? Well, scarcity. Again, yes, gold is scarce, silver is scarce, but it's been growing in supply forever. And even though we're in a slight leveling off now, as soon as the price goes up, if it goes up again, the supply will keep going. It's been going up forever. Bitcoin's supply is capped. Big difference. You could say gold is scarce, but it's not even close to as scarce as Bitcoin is. And acceptability. Yeah, gold is theoretically acceptable, but not really. I mean, most people in this demonetized world wouldn't take a gold coin if you gave it to them. You look at the guy who, Mark Dice, he's always on the street saying, I'll give you a gold coin or a Hershey bar, and the people take the Hershey bar.
Right.
I mean, the fact is gold is not universally acceptable. Everyone knows what gold is. They've heard of it, but it's not universally acceptable. Whereas Bitcoin, it will once it starts to go viral, everyone will accept Bitcoin because they'll know what they're getting is Bitcoin, and there's no question about it. So next up, question.
Hey, actually,
yes, go on.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing to that list, and I think it didn't hit me until I really started studying Bitcoin, but I think there's a critical thing missing there, and that's it's really highlighted by Bitcoin, but it's how easy is it to steal, right? So like if you have a cow, you have to keep it outside, you sleep in the house, it's easy to untie that thing and run off with it if that's what you're using for money. Gold is much better because you can hide it under your pillow. But if you're trying to buy a house with gold and you're going to throw enough gold in a backpack to go buy a house, that's a really dicey situation, and it's really, really easy to rob you. But with Bitcoin, it's a PIN number, right? It's a password. You can memorize it and nobody can get it, and nobody can counterfeit it, which is another form of stealing. That's a problem with both gold and fiat. And so I think that Bitcoin really highlights that attribute, like a good money or a good asset to use as money, I should say.
Right. And actually, I'll add one more to that, but I'll finish by saying, again, in the unconfiscatable, what you're talking about, look, I spent all those years in the bullion business and all those years owning precious metals. And I could tell you that when you think about it, again, compared to Bitcoin, how ridiculous it is to try to safeguard gold in your house, which is where most people keep it. Or then, we'd sell it like, you sell it with Brinks, but then it's held at a third party, which the government could come and take whenever they want, or they could come and take whenever they want if there was some kind of emergency situation. And,
yep.
The storage issues you deal with, we'd have to tell people, well, a metal detector, can get any gold unless you bury it like 10 feet down straight up in this kind of box and you do midnight gardening. The point is that it's so comical how scary it is. It was certainly scary to my wife, scary to me, what you have to go through to protect it, especially if you are a well-known, as I was, a high-profile owner of gold.
Right.
And then, of course, you have, you have the same issues with Bitcoin as far as making sure that other people know about it. But, that's the same issue for both. So
yeah, but you could do something like multi-sig addresses, right? Where if somebody kidnaps you and says, give me your gold, they can do that. But if somebody kidnaps you and says, give me your Bitcoin, it's like, well, there's this company and they have access to it, and they'll only sign the key if they see me and my family at the facility, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of great options that we have with Bitcoin. And
the other thing that as you bring up unconfiscatable, it's uncensorable. No government could do anything. No government can ban Bitcoin, and no government can decree it. They can't even windfall profit tax it once it starts to become go outside, it becomes decentralized and goes outside of the banking system. So gold, they banned it in 1933. They banned it again the government in 1971 said no other government can take the gold that's rightfully theirs. Americans
Yep.
were not allowed to own gold for 40 years, and they probably won't be allowed to own it again if the government decides that it's in their best interest. Whereas, there's nothing that the governments can do to censure Bitcoin as well as confiscate it. So I think the question of what is money and how much better Bitcoin is as money than anything we've ever seen is over. So next up, the question of whether any other crypto assets can lay claim to being money, and for that matter, will any other crypto assets, current or yet to be invented, ever have the ability to replicate Bitcoin's monetary properties? To which my current view is unequivocally no, as not only is Bitcoin money, in my opinion, but the most perfect form of money ever created by man or Mother Nature alike, with properties that are unreplicatable. So to this question, JW, assuming you too view Bitcoin as money, do you believe any other crypto assets have monetary properties? And if not, do you believe that in a Bitcoin-focused monetary environment, other crypto assets could develop such properties?
Yeah, so I think we're still thinking about money slightly differently. I think you're thinking about money as a set of attributes, and I'm thinking about money as a way to describe the way an asset is used. So, for example, we would look at cigarettes in a prison, and we would say, well, they don't really have as many attributes that we're talking about as gold does. But I would say it doesn't matter, right? It's just the best thing that they have access to. That is money inside the prison with these group of people that are trading. It's not money probably for the guards, and it's not money once you walk out the door because nobody's using it as money. So it's money is a way of describing how something's used. So do I think Bitcoin is money? No, I don't think Bitcoin is money. I think Bitcoin has attributes that make it a good gamble that it will become money, and not just money, but a global money. I think that we're in an environment where we have global trade, and the only reason that we have multiple currencies or multiple things that we use as money is that there's violent government force that causes Canadians to use Canadian dollars and causes United States citizens to use US dollars. And if there wasn't that sort of coercion, the Canadians and the Americans would agree on a money to use, right? Because we trade with each other a lot. So we wouldn't have exchange rates and all this nonsense. It's not the best tool to use for the job. So I do think that it will become global. I think that humans tend to pick the tool that works best. I think Bitcoin does work best. And so, that's my investment thesis, right? Like I'm buying it. I consider it an asset right now, not money, but I'm buying it because I think that it will be adopted as global money, and it's pretty limited. So that should mean, $5-10 million per Bitcoin. But the reason that I'm kind of clarifying all that is that when we bring altcoins into it and we say, are those guys going to be used as money? The answer for me is no, and particularly because this is a winner take all situation, right? If we have multiple monies, then we're just doing barter, right? We're back to not having the problem solved that we really want solved, which is one asset that we all agree to hold and to exchange and to save. And if we have 5 assets that we all hold and exchange, then we don't have money, because money is that one thing that we use to exchange. So because of that, it's a zero-sum game, right? Everybody's fighting. All these altcoins, they have the potential to become money if they were actually better, then humans would select them and use them as money. They're not, though. They're marketing fluff and garbage, and so in my view, all the altcoins are going to zero because none of them are useful tools, and we can't have more than one in play at a time to be money.
Okay, I'm just writing down all the things you're saying. Very good point. So, again, when I talk about money, again, there's really 2 aspects of money. There's monetary storage of value, and there's monetary transactions. There's 2 things. So when we say is Bitcoin money or is fiat currency money or gold, they both have 2 answers. Is gold a store of value? It was for thousands of years. I don't believe it is anymore for many reasons. We're not going to go into all of them here. One of them being that it's been destroyed by a paper market, but also by Bitcoin. Is it a transactional? Of course not. No one uses gold for anything. fiat currency is a store of value? That's the biggest joke of all time. I'm not going to answer that. And is it used for transactions? Yes, it is, but it's used with 180 different currencies that all hate each other and have central banks that are destroying the values of their currencies relative to each other. So there's not a heck of a lot of money out there. Bitcoin obviously is not a transactional currency yet, but it is a store of value. It is proven in 10 years to be the best store of value of any asset on the planet. And I believe that in that aspect, especially now that you have SegWit and you've destroyed all the competition, there's no more hard fork worries. The security is becoming huge, the network effect, the hash rate. I think that it's fair to say that from a storage of value standpoint, Bitcoin is not only money, it's the only true store of value money. I don't think gold has it anymore. And I think you're really going to see that in time that, yeah, the Chinese and Russian central banks, they are still back in time. And they're, I guess if you're printing rubles and yuan, why not buy some gold with it? But the fact is that no one else is using gold. And I think silver is already completely a base metal. There's nothing left of it monetarily. So the only real money I see in the world is transactionally, fiat currency still rules. And monetarily, I think Bitcoin is rapidly becoming the store of value. In the future, though, there's going to be a big change. We're going into a digital age. I don't even have to say I think Bitcoin will dominate everything, even though it's a possibility. The fact is, everything we know is going to change, and everything we know is going to go digital. And so safe to say, if you're invested in Bitcoin right now, I think you're in pretty good shape. One other thing you mentioned about all altcoins going to zero, I think we'll talk about the next question. I disagree that all altcoins will go to zero. I equate it more to the .com sector, where some of them has uses as securities that have nothing to do with Bitcoin. But let's move on to the next question, which is what exactly altcoins are and whether or not they are worth investing in a financial world in which Bitcoin has such a dominant monetary role. To that end, are altcoins competitors to Bitcoin from Bcash down to the penny stock crypto tier, or merely unregulated securities that complement or alternatively have nothing to do with Bitcoin? This was the principal topic that JW and I were discussing on Twitter yesterday, which in and of itself was why we had this call. In my view, with the exception of Bcash, which can't compete with Bitcoin's use cases, but has positioned itself as a competitor, none of the altcoins are Bitcoin competitors at all, as none can replicate Bitcoin's principal monetary use case. And probably none of them can even do any of the transactional things too. However, given the sheer amount of capital that's going to be leaving the legacy financial markets to come to crypto because it's the digital age, I do believe that if you are an altcoin that can create something that some investors want, it can go up in value over time. It doesn't, and some might even go up relative to Bitcoin in percentage terms, obviously not in the size, but in percentage terms. So when it comes to risk reward profile, I think it's a no-brainer. I think Bitcoin, and again, JW, right now I'm talking about the investment aspect, right? I'm not talking about whether altcoins are good or not. I'm saying if you're trying to make money, you're trying to make Bitcoin. I think the risk reward aspect of Bitcoin is the biggest no-brainer in history, because all the risks in these altcoins, many of which will go to zero, the risk in Bitcoin is a zillion times less. To me, there's almost no risk. Bitcoin's not going anywhere under any scenario, whereas 50% of altcoins will go to zero, and another 40% will become essentially worthless over time. But again, there will be some that are big winners. There were big winners in the .com pack. eBay is a perfect example. Then Google came along afterward, Facebook, you never know. But again, it's up to you as an investor. Just be very careful, because only Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Everything else is just a crypto asset. So JW, and again, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it from this perspective. Are altcoins competitors to Bitcoin? And if so, do they actually threaten it? And if so, does the Bitcoin community need to fight back or just let nature take its course?
So I think in order to answer whether something's a competitor to something else, you have to know what problem they're trying to solve. And so you mentioned like medium of exchange and store of value. Those are two important ways that if something's being used for those activities or for to solve those problems, then we would say that it's money. But there's a third one that's really critical before we would call it money, and that's a unit of account. And a unit of account means that that's how we basically do all of our mental accounting. And it can change by group of traders, right? So like in the United States, if you want to know how much an apple is, you do that math. You decide how valuable or how much it's going to cost you, and make that trade-off. You know, would I rather have my money or would I rather have the apple? You do all that math using US dollars because that's what we work with on a day-to-day basis. So if you're a US citizen, you are using US dollars for money. You can say, oh, I use Bitcoin, to pay my rent and all that sort of stuff. But there's very few people, and it would actually be very foolish to try to use Bitcoin as a unit of account because it really is volatile, right? Like you can buy a lot more bananas this week with Bitcoin than you could have 2 weeks ago. And that's because it's not commonly held yet, which makes it a great investment because as it becomes more commonly held, it's going to go up. But it doesn't make it money because money is the thing that we use as a unit of account. And it's also the thing that's easiest to sell, right? Like if you're in an area and you want to know what they're using as money and they have something that they're willing to give you a chicken, find out the list of things that they're willing to accept and then go to 10 other people. And there's probably only going to be one thing that's on all of those lists. And then you can go, okay, this civilization is using this item for money. So if Bitcoin is trying to become money and it's trying to become a unit of account, and we believe that it's going to be a global money because it's not subject to the violence that has caused us to be in this fractured state of multiple monies per region. Even though we're a global trading community, right? You don't see that sort of stuff happening naturally on the market. So if it is in fact resistant to that, so it's going to be global and it's going to be money, there by definition can't be anything else at play. And that's really hard for people that believe that competition is good, and they're right. But money is one of those things where it's not money until it wins, right? It's not like Microsoft and Amazon and pets.com. This is more like a protocol, right? It's more like HTTP. That's the way money has always worked throughout civilizations. It's like a language, right? Like if you're speaking English and that's your primary language that you use all the time, your primary language can't also be Portuguese. You could also speak Portuguese, but when we say primary language, we're talking about one thing. And when we're talking about money, we're talking about a unit of account, and that is one thing. So if Bitcoin is only useful as money, which I believe that it is, and it has any future, all of the things that are also trying to be money have to go to zero in order for it to succeed. Now, it could be a good investment because people believe that it might become money, but as an invention, it will be a failure unless it actually becomes money.
Right. Well, put it this way. Back then, I've talked about this before about the .com era. The real innovation back then was the internet.
Right.
So, but you couldn't buy the internet. You couldn't say I'm buying stock in the internet. You could buy all of the periphery, internet service providers, internet retailers, all kinds of stuff. A lot of them failed, some succeeded, but in the big picture, there was no way of buying that protocol, just investing in the periphery of it. Whereas here, you have the unique opportunity of actually buying the protocol. And that's why, again, it's so safe. Like during 2000, during the .com crash, the internet didn't go away. The internet just got stronger. And the same thing with Bitcoin. Yes, the price goes up, it goes down. But the fact is Bitcoin is far stronger now than it was 2 months ago, especially after we saw, the impact that the crash had on the periphery. And you realize how much stronger Bitcoin is. And of course, with each passing day, network security, technology adoption are going up. So that's the beauty of the risk reward of Bitcoin, because you could never have done that back 20 years ago with the internet. You had to invest in risky things to be part of it. Now, when you talk about the future of money, it's, again, you have the ultimate Bitcoin maximalist view. It's so maximalist, it's almost beyond my grasp, because I can't conceive a world where with so many people in countries that only one thing is considered money for global trade. It really doesn't matter because, again, from an investment perspective, if Bitcoin had 5% of the global trade of money, it would probably be your $1 million a coin. If it actually becomes the global standard, it will literally become priceless. So tell me, what is your view of the future? I mean, I'm talking about 100 years from now. I'm talking about 25 years from now. What would be the way you see the world evolving? What would be a likely scenario?
Yeah. So, I mean, the to say that it's hard to conceive of a world where there's only one thing that's used as money, all you have to do is go back and look at history, right? Gold worked better as money. So when a group of people started trading together, and we can see archaeological evidence of this, there's little civilizations that are using like seashells or something like that. And when they get hooked up with a bigger, more advanced civilization that uses gold, they immediately start using gold, right? Because it works better, and also the richer civilization uses gold, and so you don't want all of that friction of the exchange of seashells to gold. And you could argue that part of the problem is that they also bring with them tools that make it really easy to harvest lots of seashells and destroy that money as well. But the reality is, we know that trading groups tend to coalesce on one thing that they can use because it's just so much easier. It's just a better freaking tool, right? Like, we know that when people need to pound things, they tend to use something that looks roughly like a hammer. Right?
And again, you could be completely right, except that doesn't mean it's the only thing. We're talking about for big trade, of course.
No, it means it's the only thing, right? Like that is what. So if you had a group of people that were using seashells and they were completely disconnected from, let's say, Egypt, right? And the Egyptians start traveling further up and down the river, and they end up getting connected with this group of people. That group of people is going to end up using gold for their medium of exchange, for their store of value, and for their unit of account, because they're trading with the Egyptians. So money, by definition, right? Like, just what the word means, is the thing that a group of people use to facilitate trade. And it's always the thing, right? Because if it wasn't the thing, it doesn't have all of these other magical properties that come out from just using one thing. And that's why we call that a barter economy. Because you don't get to do accounting in any way that makes sense. You don't even get to calculate profits unless you have one thing that you use as money. And that's really, really important, to be able to calculate profits, to make good decisions in the economy, and everybody become wealthier as a result of your labor. And you just don't get to calculate profits in any intelligible way without money. So you could force it, right? You could say, okay, you guys continue to use seashells, we'll continue to use gold, but it's just not what people tend to do, and it doesn't work well. So I can conceive of no theory that makes sense where we would have multiple monies, unless there's the use of violence, right? If there's somebody that is forcing the locals to continue to use seashells, even though they would be richer and better off and their life would be easier if they used gold, then I could see that happening. But the whole idea of Bitcoin is that it's so coercion resistant, right? So I don't see a world in which Bitcoin makes any sense that doesn't result in a global single money.
Well, the thing is, because of Bitcoin's divisibility to the 100 millionth, and heck, they can do a soft fork and make it to the 100 billionth if they wanted to. It is theoretically possible to be a global currency. I mean, the problem with gold is that it's not everywhere. I mean, everyone doesn't have access to gold, and it's not divisible on top of that. And even the smallest denominations are too expensive for most people. So in that manner, gold didn't work. And even in silver's case, it barely could work on a global basis.
But we did actually use gold on a global basis, right? So you don't have to like be a crazy person to think that we're going to be using a single global money, because we have in the past.
But gold was never able to be used by, in small villages. People just didn't have gold or couldn't afford it. Whereas Bitcoin, they really could afford it on local scale. Anyone will be able to afford Bitcoin because of its divisibility, and the computer access will enable anyone to get access to it. So compared to gold, Bitcoin is a 1,000 times more likely to be used on a global scale. The question is, will the world truly get that global that everyone is using? And if so, how long would it take for that to happen?
Well, let me walk you through a situation, right? Like I hire software developers. I have for a long time. if I want to hire a software developer because I'm competent, I don't care whether they're physically located, right? I'm going to hire the best talent that I can get my hands on. And if they speak a different language, that's fine, as long as they speak English good enough, right? Like I throw all these calculations basically mentally in when I'm hiring a software developer. And 10 years ago, that meant that I was hiring a lot of software developers out of China. It was an absolute nightmare to pay those guys. Trying to get US dollars converted to RMB and in their bank accounts was not easy, and it was expensive. So in a world where Bitcoin is available, obviously I would select Bitcoin to give that to them, right? Like I would pay them in Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin is either going up, which it is now, or it's stable, which it will be when it's fully adopted and everybody's saving it, they would want to accept Bitcoin. And then when they go to spend the money, there would be other people that would be willing to accept Bitcoin for that, right? Like if they're going out and they're going to go to a restaurant, the restaurant can either accept RMB or they can accept Bitcoin. The same calculation that made me take Bitcoin in the first place, because I'm human, is the same one that the Chinese guy made when he decided to accept it. It should be the same one that's being calculated in the mind of the guy that runs the restaurant, right? Is it going up or stable? Then I'll take it. And because all of those things make sense and we're actually trading and interacting with each other, it's like the ultimate viral sort of asset, right? Like nothing, it's like, it is like a social network, right? It's like a physical or an economic social network. So it's not hard for me to imagine that Bitcoin will be adopted as a global money. What's hard for me to imagine is that some altcoin piece of garbage that doesn't have any security properties, right? That it's digital, but it's not, you can't be sure that it's scarce because it's weak, right? Somebody can steal it from you. Somebody can inflate it. It's just not a good, it's not a good digital asset. Why would that be in play at all? That's the part that's inconceivable to me.
Right. Well, again, Bitcoin absolutely could become global just because the world, is becoming younger and more tech savvy. But the social networking can't be underestimated. People will embrace, especially the millennials, the Gen Zs, whatever comes afterward, the ability for everyone to be on the same platform and playing for the same currency everywhere around the world. I mean, there's never been anything like it. And of course, an altcoin can never do that. The network effect on Bitcoin grows exponentially, and there is no altcoin that has the ability to do that. The unique factors that brought Bitcoin into play as a decentralized platform, it's almost like it was divine that it was handed down, that it would be so strange that someone who, by the way, owns 1 million Bitcoin would become anonymous. But that's just how it came to be. And so it's unreplicatable. And because of the social networking and the network effects, how they multiply so fast, absolutely Bitcoin can become the dominant global currency. It's just a matter of time. Now, as for altcoins in my future, and again, I wrote one particular article called Cryptocurrencies versus Securities. I'm trying to make the point that there's not a single altcoin or anything on the planet from gold to fiat that has any chance of being money of the future other than Bitcoin. So if something else is going to be money, please tell me what it is, because it hasn't been invented yet. And if it's a cryptocurrency, it's not going to be something, it would have to subsume or consume Bitcoin, and that's not happening either. So Bitcoin is the most likely thing that happens. That takes over as money. It's just a matter of time. But as for altcoins, again, cryptocurrencies versus securities. If you try to compete with Bitcoin, you're going to lose. If you try to directly compete with Bitcoin, like Bcash, you're really going to lose over time. So you really have to just discern. I'm talking about, look, I'm a financial guy. You say, can you produce something, a niche, whether it's being a service company, a token, or whatever it is, something that can create value in the minds of investors. And some will do that. There's no doubt in my mind. Right now, it's murky as to what is doing anything, because right now it's all in speculation phase, and very few of altcoins that have plans have even put the plans into place. So most of them will fail, but there will be a periphery of assets that are investable that have nothing to do with money. That's my whole point. But they will be very small. It's kind of like you know, like you have the, let's say you have the market cap now of all the current .coms, and you add up the big ones like Facebook and Google and all the small ones, what would their value, what's their cumulative value compared to the value of the internet? What if the internet was going public today? It would probably be 50, 100, 1,000 times more than all of the quote periphery. Whereas with altcoins, if Bitcoin does have that network effect and becomes money, you can have some huge winners in the altcoin space that have nothing to do with competing with Bitcoin. But it'll be like I said the other day, you can fit like thousands of Earths inside of Jupiter.
Yeah. So there are, it depends on what you mean by altcoins. So I'll clarify. If you're saying a purely digital asset, right, then I would say that that's competing to be money, right? If it has no, if it's not like a bearer instrument that represents a car or a share in a company or something like that, it's just purely digital. Something that's digital, and this is one of the things that I think is really hard for people to grasp about Bitcoin, it is worthless, right? You can't do anything with it. You can't make jewelry out of it. You can't do anything with it, except you can use it as money. So it is like this incredibly useful tool, but only because you can use it as an asset that facilitates trade. So like something like gold, they would say it has like an commodity value, and then it has a monetary value, right? So if gold is worth $2,000 an ounce, maybe it would only be worth $500 an ounce for jewelry making, but a lot more people want it to use it as a money, as a store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account, whatever. Then maybe it's selling at $2,000 an ounce, and $1,500 is its monetary value. Bitcoin or any digital asset is unique in the sense that it has no use value, right? It has like no industrial use. It only has monetary value. So a digital asset can only be valuable if it is either money or is a play to become money, because that's the only problems that it could possibly solve for humanity or for humanity are monetary. But if you're talking about something like a utility token that represents equity in a company, which is just future revenue, then that's different. And I would say that's not competing to become money, and it's not competing with Bitcoin. So Bcash, Ripple, Ethereum, all these things are clearly trying to create a digital asset that is just digital and is only useful to humanity if it's used as money.
Right. And some of these things, by the way, they may be quote competing with Bitcoin, but Bitcoin could do the same thing. So Ethereum, you could say it's a digital asset, or you can say it's a token that's useful. The fact is, with Rootstock, for instance, Bitcoin will do everything Ethereum does, just like it'll do everything the privacy coins does. It'll do everything that the platforms do. It'll do everything that they all do in time, just one thing at a time. So again, if you're going to compete with Bitcoin on actual applications, you're definitely going to get subsumed over time. And so I'll just finish the point by saying I think we both agree, money-wise, Bitcoin is unchallenged. I don't think there's anything on the planet that can challenge it. I think gold is going to be so far in the rearview mirror a few years from now, especially when the older generations that own the vast majority of it pass it on to their kids, and the kids say, I don't want this stuff. I want Bitcoin. I mean, it's that simple. And fiat always dies, and it's dying as we speak. And the altcoins are periphery. That's what they are. Of course. So, yes.
I was just going to ask. So where does rhodium fit into that, or brodium, or whatever that thing is? Because that's the thing that got us talking. And to me, that's a purely digital asset. It can only be valuable as money. It's only useful to use as money. So it's competing with Bitcoin, and it seems to have absolutely, like you're saying, like the chance that it would ever replace Bitcoin's laughable. So I don't get what the investment thesis could be there.
Well, again, the way that I look at it, it's cryptocurrencies versus securities. Rhodium, again, I'm a Wall Street guy. I'm a finance guy. So I look at the altcoins, and the first and foremost, I look at them and I go, what do they have that investors would want? It doesn't matter whether it's competing with Bitcoin or not. Is it something that would be perceived as valuable from an investment standpoint? It's that simple.
Okay. So
Yes.
just to clarify, you think that it will eventually, you think it is competing with Bitcoin and it will eventually go to zero, but that doesn't mean
No,
that there can't be
no,
some
not at
short
all.
term.
I think it has a use case that's going to be very difficult to replicate, which is in perception. Again, it's not trying to be money, but it will be perceived by investors, correctly so, as ultra scarce Bitcoin. Not ultra scarce Bitcoin, in the first ultra scarce use case altcoin.
Okay,
Because
but
yeah,
we're talking about something that's digital. How can something that's digital? The only reason Bitcoin is scarce is that it's a fixed supply. But when it's digital, like you can add zeros on the end as much as you want. What makes it scarce is that for I don't know $10,000 right now, you can buy 1/120 or 1/21 millionth of the total supply that will ever exist. So you could do with $1,000. I don't know what Brodium is trading at right now. You can still buy a percentage of. I'm assuming it's capped. That there is an ultimate cap. You can buy a percentage, and it would. I mean, does it just come down to like your investment thesis is unit bias won't ever be discovered, and people won't eventually
well,
realize how
well,
silly
again,
this is?
keep in mind, it's a crypto dividend that you had to be a holder of Bitcoin to get, and you got for free. I wouldn't be talking about any altcoins as a Bitcoin maximalist if they weren't given to me for free, because I won't. I have, as a rule, I've bought Bitcoin. That is that's how I invest in the cryptocurrency space. But I do look out for all these things, and I think some of them, like you pick one like Be Private, and there's so many bad things about it in my view, but uh, one in particular is that if you say its use case is that it's a privacy Bitcoin. Well, first of all, it's a privacy Zcash. It's not a privacy Bitcoin, but like it's forked from Zcash. But the fact is, Bitcoin will just subsume it. Rhodium is clever because Bitcoin can't say there's only a 2.1 million cap, and it's not a fork. So Bitcoin can
But Bitcoin only has a 1.2 million cap of
yes.
macro coins, right?
Well,
I mean,
again,
arbitrary.
this is money versus securities. I think they've created a very clever. They're going the decentralized route. Everything's anonymous and all that. I think that it will cater very well to wealthy investors. They will like it and they will invest in it. So I think it will have value to investors. But it's not ever going to be money. It's going to be a security. It's that simple.
So, but a
Yes.
security is usually either
Yes.
an equity instrument or a debt instrument, right?
Not in the digital age. In the digital age, everything is virtual. That's the whole point. And I look around the altcoin space, and I look for anything that might be valuable to investors. And to me, the only things I see that are valuable are hype stories, like Ethereum's going to like be the next technology giant of the world, or scams, or things that are forks that are going to be, or that have applications that are going to be subsumed. So you really have to be very clever in creating something that can last more than a little bit. And also keep in mind, of course, that we are in the early stages of a massive transformation or of the economy where I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars, trillions, tens of trillions are going to leave stocks, bonds, currencies to go into crypto. And of course, so a lot of them are just getting the rising tide lifting all boats. But if you can be clever enough in creating something that investors will hook onto, then it's a way to make money. But from a monetary standpoint, I don't think B Rhodium, first of all, B Rhodium loves Bitcoin. That's their primary driver. Bitcoin price goes up, Bitcoin Rhodium price will go up too. Bitcoin goes down, B Rhodium price will go down. So
How do
it's
you how do
yes,
you distinguish between scams and legitimate projects? Because the way
yes,
that I distinguish is has like either doesn't make false claims or
yes,
false claims is kind of one thing, right? And then the other thing is, are they trying to actually solve a legitimate problem, right?
right.
Bitcoin is trying to solve the problem of money. Ethereum says they're trying to solve the problem of smart contracts. That's legitimate. But then the question is like, is there a bunch of false claims, right? And of
Right,
course, with
right.
Ethereum, there is. So
A
what?
scam,
How do you apply that to Brodium?
yeah. Well, I mean, a scam in general in the altcoin space would be a coin, and they're all centralized, that promises to do something that has no intention of doing that. It's no different than dot coms. They had great grand plans, and it just brings in money so you can pump it up, and that's what most of them are. That's
Right.
what most of altcoins are. Most of ICOs are. They're just piggybacking on Bitcoin's success, and to a lesser extent, Ethereum's success. And the funny thing with Ethereum is that while it does, quote, solve a use case, it's created far more problems than it's solved, because it's created this whole frenzy of scams that piggyback on top of it. And itself has become sort of a Ponzi scheme, because a lot of them fund themselves with Ethereum.
So the way that I'll do this to Ethereum, right? Like with Ethereum, they claim that they're doing smart contracts, world's computer or whatever. But the reason that it's a scam is that I don't think they ever had any intention of doing smart contracts, because smart contracts, that's an invention of Nick Szabo, or at least he coined the term at the very least. And the idea is that you have immutable code, right? And so they used to use those terms, but I don't think they ever had any intention or really thought that they were ever going to create a network of government hard systems, right? I think they always knew that that was going to be Bitcoin, and they couldn't do that.
I think they probably never knew that they'd create the ICO facilitator, and that all of a sudden the whole world would be hooked onto their tokens. I mean,
that's like another layer of scam, right? But just like the base layer of Ethereum, let's say that they had never done ICOs, or they had never, and the only reason ICOs exist on Ethereum, incidentally, instead of Bitcoin, is that they promoted it, right? Like we've had multiple versions of things where you could do ICOs on Bitcoin, but we just, as a community, haven't really been excited about it because we think it's a stupid idea. But set all of that aside, Ethereum claimed that they were going to create a platform that was immutable, right? Where you put a contract on it and that thing is trustworthy and reliable and irreversible. I don't think they ever thought that they could pull that off. I think if you wanted to do that, that you have to do that on Bitcoin, especially if you're Vitalik and you've been in the space for a long time. So I think that they were intentionally creating that narrative. If I try to apply that to Rhodium, it's hard for me to imagine that the guys that created it really don't get that you can just move the decimal point, right? And you can always just change the name of the unit that you're using, right? So like with Bitcoin, there's 21 million, but there's 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin. So we could talk about, whatever, 21 trillion or exa whatever of Satoshis, or we could talk about, there's only 0.021 or let's see, 21,000 we'll say kilobitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is far more scarce than Rhodium if we just say we're going to talk about kilobitcoin instead of Bitcoin. I don't think that the guys that created this missed out on that really obvious point when we're talking about digital assets. And so because their narrative is digital scarcity, I believe that they're intentionally deceiving consumers into buying something that is really dumb.
Well, I think it's funny because, well, one, no one's bought anything, right? It's been given out. But I think the whole point is that, to me, it's just one part of the periphery. I think it's a very, very clever part of the periphery. There's definitely a cap. It's definitely a decentralized protocol that was taken from what Bitcoin does, but it was never meant to be a competitor of Bitcoin. It's going to be a small part of the cryptocurrency ecosystem, but a very clever one, which I believe will maintain investor interest. Again, investor interest. It's not a matter of governments will perceive this as a potential money. It's just, I think, one of the more cleverly created altcoins. They looked at all the things that people are interested in. They said, we will create something that will have value. And that's how I view it. And people who are Bitcoin holders got it for free. And so I think it'll be one of the more useful and long-lived altcoins. That's simple. But when you talk about, again, it's, thousands of Jupiters go into Earths go into Jupiter. Bitcoin is going to be, especially if it even comes close to what you're talking about. I mean, the numbers are mind-boggling. I mean, if it truly became a half of global trade, it probably Bitcoin would be worth, in today's dollars, I don't know, $100 trillion, more than that. So again, when you talk about anything from Ethereum to be Rhodium to anything, they're all kind of immaterial. And again, Ethereum's going to have to fight Bitcoin. Ethereum will have to fight Bitcoin a lot harder than Rhodium will, because Rhodium's just a little security, but Ethereum is trying to do things that Bitcoin ultimately can do. But again, I don't want to overestimate Rhodium, because it's just a small little part of the periphery. It has really no interest. It's just a crypto dividend that I think will do well. That's all.
So for me, like when you say something that will interest investors, I'm thinking an investor is somebody that has capital. They look at problems that the world's facing, and they try to put their money into solving problems that are going to
Not
be very
solving problems, making money. It's the
well.
Wall
But the
Street
way,
mentality.
but that's the
That's why
way that.
I say it's going to be the Berkshire Hathaway of crypto. I think
So
that.
that's why I'm trying to distinguish, right? You can make money. So like I'm just saying what I think of when I think of investors is basically sort of two different things, right?
Mhm.
People that are like, hey, book sales on the internet just make sense because warehousing costs are much cheaper than retail space. It's a better buying experience, whatever, right? That would be smart money, and they would invest in Amazon, right? And then there's stupid money or dumb money or people that are going to be scammed, or people that just don't not wise investors, right? And they're going to look at like a price chart and go, well, there's a history there, let me throw some cash at it and see what happens. I don't see how Brodium could invest any smart investors, because it doesn't actually solve or even purport or have any intention of solving any real problems.
Right. Well, but it's not trying to solve a problem. It's just trying to provide something that will have perceived value. Again, the only thing in the whole crypto space that's really solving a problem is Bitcoin.
Right. But no, you nailed it, man. They're trying to create something that has perceived value, right?
That's right.
But it doesn't have actual value. It has no actual utility. It solves no actual problem. That is by definition a scam.
Right. Well, look, we'll leave it this way, because again, Rhodium is just one of many. There's many things we could just substitute the names for other altcoins in it. The fact is that, you know, we're going into a Bitcoin centric world. It's going to take maybe a short amount of time, maybe a longer amount of time, but all these arguments are immaterial, because when it comes to what governments are going to do, what massive institutions are going to do, they are going to be shifting from fiat currency and gold into Bitcoin. But there's going to be a whole economy that runs alongside it, of service companies and niches, and a lot of them are scams, just like in the regular economy. And most of them are tiny and immaterial. They all play their own role, and there are, like I said, there's some huge winners that are in the .com sector, but most were losers, and the same will go here. There will be altcoins that will be huge winners, but most of them will be huge losers. So it's a matter of, some people are investing for principal, other people are just investing for profit, and that will never go away. But I think what we came across in this call, most importantly, is that I think we both share the view that Bitcoin actually has the potential of becoming global money. And again, people, because I'm saying this because right now most of the people listening are thinking from an investor perspective, because they want to survive and thrive personally in the future world. And if even a tenth, a 20th, a 50th of what you're talking about comes to pass, which I believe 100%, Bitcoin will be the best investment anyone ever makes in lifetimes. So again, unless you have any final conclusions, I don't think we really disagree on anything. I just think that you're a little more maximalist in that you believe that nothing that is not Bitcoin in the virtual space can succeed.
Yeah, I think maybe in a way I'm more maximalist, and gosh, I freaking hate that term, but Vitalik got that one in there. That term.
Did he say that?
Okay. Yeah, he coined that, and then the hyper Bitcoinization is also another term that I absolutely despise. But sorry, slight segue there. So in a way, I'm more bullish on Bitcoin, and in a way, I'm less bullish on Bitcoin, and that's because I do think that Bitcoin, in theory, I'm 99% sure it's not going to be replaced, because I see nothing on the horizon that works better or that has the potential to work better, and it's got to overcome network effects and all kinds of other things. But I do think that if there was something that was invented that worked better as money, like for example, if I believed that Bitcoin wasn't ever going to get confidential transactions, and there was something else that was going to be as secure, I would think eventually it would overcome the network effect and replace Bitcoin. So what I'm really, really positive about is that we will end up with a single global money, because we have invented the technology to resist the violent forces that have prevented us from using something like gold as a single global money, and that it works better. So I'm very sure it's going to be something, right? And I'm probably like 98% sure it's going to be Bitcoin, because I just don't see anything on the horizon, and it's got so many advantages. So I think like on the economic side, I'm very, very, very confident that it has to be one thing. I'm slightly less confident, but still very confident that Bitcoin is the only thing that's out there and that's on the horizon, and that has as much constant investment of smart people working on it to improve it. And so I think it's going to be that.
Okay. Well, I will say as we conclude this conference call or podcast that I too believe that 98% is a good percentage of my confidence that Bitcoin, I don't know if it will become the 100% dominant, but I believe that its dominance, its share of the global monetary future will be absolutely enormous. And I say that with 98% confidence. So we will conclude today's podcast here. I think it was very enlightening about the philosophical underpinnings of Bitcoin as sound money. And please follow JW at WeathermanIam on Twitter, and his websites jwweatherman.com and btcthreats.com. As for me, go to cryptogoldcentral.com, try our free 7-day trial. And of course, come out to our big, well-timed Denver meetup tomorrow night at 6:00 p.m., which you can buy tickets for at the Boulder Blockchain or Rocky Mountain Blockchain websites, or listen live to at the World Crypto Network. Thanks very much and have a great crypto day.